As we enter August of 2024, the election is very different from what it looked like just 1 month ago. Joe Biden has dropped out, and Kamala Harris is going to replace him as the Democratic nominee. However, Trump still maintains a very solid 2-point lead in national polling, and in this video, I will be updating my 2024 electoral map prediction. We're going to begin by filling in the solid states for both candidates, starting off with the solid states for Donald Trump. These are states that he is going to easily win by margins of at least 12 percentage points. Trump is on track to carrying the states of Utah, Wyoming, Idaho, Montana, North Dakota, South Dakota, all of Nebraska except the 2nd District, Kansas, Oklahoma, Missouri, Arkansas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Tennessee, Kentucky, West Virginia, Indiana, South Carolina, and Alaska by solid margins. These are all states that he's won by over 12% in the last 2 elections. However, we do have a few new additions. First off, the 2nd District of Maine. Donald Trump is going to do very well in that district and is on track to winning the 1 electoral vote it offers by at least 12 to 15 points. We also have the states of Iowa and Ohio. Trump carried both of them in the last 2 elections by 8 to 9 percentage points, but considering that Republicans are continuing to make gains in the Midwest, and Donald Trump's running mate J.D. Vance is a senator from Ohio, that effect is also going to rub off in Iowa. And so with all of these solid states filled in for the former president, Donald Trump is at 149 electoral votes. For Kamala Harris, on the other hand, she is on track to winning the states of Washington, Oregon, and her home state of California, as well as Hawaii. Yes, the Biden administration's handling of the Maui fires was not good in the Aloha state, but it's simply too blue of a state to vote any other way. Joe Biden carried it by 29 points in the last election, although I do expect this margin to drop to somewhere around 20 points. We also have Illinois, Vermont, Massachusetts, Connecticut, Rhode Island, Delaware, Maryland, and the District of Columbia. This will give the vice president just 138 electoral votes. Before we get into the more competitive states, only 10% of you guys are actually subscribed, so please take the time to subscribe right now for more content like this leading up to the election in November. And follow me on Twitter for daily political updates, link in the description below. And so now we're going to get into the likely states. These states will be decided by margins between 5 to 12 percentage points. They're going to be more competitive than the safe states, but one candidate still has a pretty clear edge. And so we will begin with the likely states for Donald Trump. He's already at 149 electoral votes, and there are 2 likely states on this map that he's going to win by margins over 5 points. I think it's pretty obvious what the first one is, and that is the state of Texas. 40 electoral votes. The state is not solid for the GOP anymore. Republicans haven't won major statewide elections in the state by 12 points in quite a while. However, they are able to win it by around 10 percentage points, which still makes it a pretty red state. Democrats are not going to flip Texas for a very long time. It is such a big state, and to have to flip even just 5% of voters will take a very long time. So looking at the margin from 2020, Donald Trump won the Lone Star State by 5.6%. He's almost guaranteed to win it by a larger margin. Against Joe Biden, he was on track to winning it by 8 to 10 points. Against Kamala Harris, it's not going to be too different. And so this 40 electoral votes already puts Trump at 189. And the next state that we have as likely for the former president is another big prize, the largest prize still remaining on the map. That is, of course, Florida. 30 electoral votes from the Sunshine State are also likely to go to former President Trump. This time, a state that he only won by 3 points in the last election. And in 2016, Florida was decided by just a 1-point margin. That is how close the state was 8 years ago. But today, Florida is totally different. It is a Republican state. I mean, as late as 2012, Florida went to Obama, and it was the most competitive state of that election. That is no longer the case again. Florida is no longer a swing state. It is a Republican state. We saw Governor Ron DeSantis and Senator Marco Rubio get reelected by solid margins in 2022. On the presidential level, it's going to be slightly more competitive, but nonetheless, Kamala Harris has no chance in Florida, and she really shouldn't try at all because it would just be a total waste of her time for her to go there and campaign. We're now going to get into the likely states for Kamala Harris, and the first two are going to be pretty obvious. These are states you typically would expect to be solid, and they are, of course, New York and New Jersey. Democrats have simply been hit by too many scandals in these two very closely connected states, and they've lost the trust of many voters. The last time that New York, which Joe Biden won by 23 points 4 years ago, was not a solid blue state was 1988. It has been almost 4 decades since the last election where New York was not decided by at least a 12-point margin. And so the reasoning why in New York is, of course, after Joe Biden won the election in 2020, we saw the resignation of Andrew Cuomo for sexual harassment scandals, as well as Kathy Hochul simply being unpopular. Her first lieutenant governor had to resign in disgrace as well. And then New York City Mayor Eric Adams is under investigation. He isn't popular in the city either. And then in New Jersey, Bob Menendez, who is still a sitting senator from the state, he plans on resigning in August. But he has been in the race for a few months now for his Senate seat, even though Democrats already nominated someone else. He is simply dragging his party down by refusing to resign until very recently and by remaining in the race until just a few weeks ago as well. So Democrats have simply lost too much trust in voters from these two states, and they are currently not on track to being solid blue as they typically have been over the last 3 decades. We also have the states of Colorado and New Mexico, 2 states that Kamala Harris is probably going to win. Joe Biden won both of them by double-digit margins in the last election. But polling here hasn't been the greatest for Democrats over the last 4 years. Joe Biden was leading by single-digit margins in both of them. Kamala Harris is probably going to do slightly better than Biden would have if he hadn't dropped out. But Kamala Harris is not going to win these states by solid margins, not even by double-digit margins. Both Colorado and New Mexico will be likely blue this cycle. New Mexico could actually fall into lean Democratic territory, but until we get polling from the state between Harris and Trump, we just won't really know. But we do know that she is the favorite, but she's probably not going to do as well as Biden. And so with these solid and likely states filled in for both candidates, Donald Trump continues to lead with 219 electoral votes to Kamala Harris's 196. We're now left with just the most competitive states in the country, totaling 123 electoral votes from 11 states. It is these states that are going to decide the election. And so we're going to begin by filling in the lean Harris states. These states will be decided by margins between 1 to 5 percentage points. And to start, we have the state of Maine, 2 electoral votes. It's not really talked about too much because electorally, these 2 votes don't really make too much of a difference, but it is a state that Joe Biden carried by a nearly double-digit margin 4 years ago that is suddenly going to be significantly more competitive. Hillary Clinton only won Maine by 2.9 percentage points. It is a state that can get competitive. Donald Trump polled very well against Joe Biden in the state, and so as of right now, I do have the state of Maine being lean for Kamala Harris. It is probably not going to vote for her by anywhere near a double-digit margin. We also have neighboring New Hampshire, 4 electoral votes. The Granite State isn't too important electorally either, but it does tend to be in the middle. Donald Trump actually came close to winning it in 2016. He lost it by just 0.37%. Typically, the state does lean very slightly to the left, but Republicans have found successes there in the past, like we saw with Chris Sununu, who was elected 4 times as governor over the past 8 years. In 2024, though, New Hampshire is going to go to Kamala Harris, although by a lesser margin than Biden's 7-point victory from 2020. We also have the state of Virginia, 13 electoral votes. This is going to be the final lean Democratic state on our map. It's a state that Republicans could have won if Joe Biden had stayed in the race. Now, still, Donald Trump has a chance in the Commonwealth of Virginia, where Republican Governor Glenn Youngkin was elected just 1 year after Joe Biden won in 2020. So Virginia can vote for the GOP, but with Biden out of the race, it is looking slightly less likely that the GOP is going to pick up a new state, a state they haven't won since the early 2000s. We're now going to get right into the lean Trump states, starting off with the 2nd District of Nebraska. Trump lost it in 2020, but won it in 2016, and is on track to taking it back this November. We also have the state of North Carolina, 16 electoral votes. A lot of people thought that the Tar Heel state was going to vote blue in 2020, but it in fact did not. Donald Trump won the state by 1.3%, while Georgia, which was thought to be more conservative, actually went to Biden. Democrats haven't won North Carolina since 2008, when Barack Obama won the election in a very favorable environment for Democrats. He was basically the best candidate Democrats have put up since Kennedy, and even then, he only won the state by 1/3 of a percentage point. Kamala Harris is no Barack Obama. There's no way she's going to win North Carolina in this election. It is lean Republican. It is still going to be remotely competitive, but there's no doubt Trump will come out on top. We also have the neighboring state of Georgia, 16 electoral votes. This is a pretty big state for Joe Biden. 2020, he won it by 1/4 of a percentage point. It was a pretty big victory for Democrats. They hadn't won the state since 1992. However, it was sort of a fluke. I mean, just 2 years later, Brian Kemp, the governor, won his re-election by a likely margin, and currently, Donald Trump leads by 3.6% in the polling average. We do have a lot of new Bloomberg Morning Consult polls, but these are not good samples. They vastly overestimated Democrats, and you'll see in many of the other states that we'll go over later on in this video, but this new poll you should honestly disregard. But the rest of it, basically every single poll has shown Trump to be dominating in the Peach State. If you compare it to the Biden polls, Kamala Harris isn't doing too much better, and so the former president is on track to carrying Georgia and flipping it back from being a blue state just in the last election. Moving westward, we have Arizona and Nevada, 2 states that also went to Biden in the last election, both of them by narrow margins, Arizona by just 0.3 and Nevada by 2.4. We're going to begin in Arizona, a state that Joe Biden won under very good circumstances for Democrats. He was in a very good position going into the election. We had not really the greatest economy at the end of Trump's term, and of course, we also had a lot of COVID. And so as a result, Democrats were heavily favored than they typically would have been. If we didn't have the pandemic, Donald Trump probably would have been reelected president in 2020. However, looking at what we're seeing in Arizona today, Trump is still going to win the state back. He leads by 4.2% in the polling average. I wouldn't trust this new Bloomberg poll, but just looking at the state as a whole, it is still Republican. The GOP hasn't really put up the best candidates in recent years for the Senate and governor elections. That's why they've lost all of them. But Donald Trump has shown he is able to win in the state. He carried it by nearly 4 points in 2016. Arizona is going to remain competitive, but in 2024, Trump is definitely the favorite, and he's probably going to win it by around 3 to 4 percentage points. Nevada is going to be close as well. It generally has been a blue state, but just barely. I mean, in 2012, Obama carried it by 7 points, but then in 2016, the margin went down to 2.4, and we saw that same margin in 2020. In the 2022 midterms, Democrats won the Senate seat, but lost the governorship. They had incumbents in both of those races, so Nevada really is very, very close. And going into 2024, Democrats simply aren't in as good of a position as they were in 4 years ago. Donald Trump now leads by 4% against Kamala Harris. In Nevada, Joe Biden was doing even worse, and again, I would not trust this recent Bloomberg poll. So on our map, Nevada will also be lean Republican, and it is by all accounts expected to vote to the right of Midwestern states such as Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. Nevada is expected to flip red before any of these Midwestern states do. We now have 4 states remaining, all of them in the upper Rust Belt, all of them states that are slowly losing electoral votes but continue to play a big role in presidential electoral politics, because without any of these 3 states, none of the candidates can get to 270 electoral votes. Donald Trump has to just win 1 out of the 4. Kamala Harris has to win every single one. And so starting off with Wisconsin, this is another lean Trump state, the final lean state on our map. 10 electoral votes from Wisconsin is going to push Trump over 270. He leads by 0.2% in the polling, but polling really overestimates Democrats here. I mean, just look at the polling from 2020. Joe Biden was supposed to win Wisconsin by 6.7%. He won it by 0.7. And Donald Trump, who has won the state in the past, in 2016, he carried Wisconsin by 0.76%. In fact, that was a larger margin than Biden's 0.63% margin from 4 years years ago. So in terms of comparing Biden and Trump over the last 8 years, Trump was actually the better performing candidate in Wisconsin. And yes, Kamala Harris is not Joe Biden, but honestly, is she any better than Hillary Clinton? Probably not. So Wisconsin is also going to be lean Republican. Donald Trump is the clear favorite. Out of all 4 of the states that were remaining, Wisconsin generally is the most conservative, so this does make a lot of sense. We also have Michigan and Pennsylvania. I'm going to give both of them to Donald Trump. He is definitely the favorite in both of these states. Joe Biden won them back by narrow margins in 2020 after Trump flipped them in 2016, and we're probably going to see a repeat of what we saw 8 years ago. Pennsylvania right now, the Keystone State, Trump is on track to win by 2.7%, and in Michigan, Harris does lead by 2% according to the average, but that's because of this very poorly done poll by Bloomberg and Morning Consult that shows Harris leading by 11 points. I mean, that is just never going to happen. The last time Michigan was that blue was when Obama was still in office, so it's not going to happen. Kamala Harris is not really leading in Michigan. Both of these states right now can go both ways. It's definitely going to go down to the wire, but I would say Donald Trump still maintains a very slight advantage. And so at this point, Kamala Harris is on track to being the worst performing Democratic nominee in a presidential election since Michael Dukakis in 1988. That is just how poorly Democrats are doing right now. In Minnesota, though, we are going to give it to the vice president. It's going to be a tilt state. It's going to get competitive. The state has continued to shift to the right over the last few years. I mean, just look at 2016. Donald Trump came within 2 points of flipping it. 8 years later, Minnesota is definitely more Republican on a fundamental level than it was in that election. Joe Biden did do well in 2020, but again, 2020 was a very favorable election cycle and a very favorable national environment for the Democrats as a whole. So based on my updated 2024 presidential election prediction, Donald Trump is still the clear favorite to win the election. He is on track to winning 313 electoral votes, while Kamala Harris trails with 225. Honestly, she is on track to put up a pretty disappointing performance on behalf of the Democratic Party. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure you like, comment, and subscribe right now for more content like this leading up to the election in November. And join my Discord server, link in the description below.